Hello there, this is the second part of a series I'm doing on the Tellius series of Fire Emblem. In the previous part, I covered the creation of the world, as well as the covenant the goddess made with the people of the continent Tellius, and the founding of its first three nations, Atari, Goldoa and Begnion. In the first generations after the foundation of these countries, those who held the blood of Tellius' two races, Laguz and Bjork, were cast out from society. The existence of these branded went on to play a pivotal role in the forming of a rift between the two Tellian races, which is where we left off last time. So now, let us continue. After being separated from Liran, it seems that Altina and her Bjork husband ruled the kingdom of Begnion for the rest of their lives. After Altina passed away, Soan succeeded her as the second king of Begnion. After him, Bjork and Laguz would rule over the country alternatingly. However, due to their superior strength, the Laguz came to rule Begnion most often. It seems that in this time, the Laguz would sometimes oppress the Bjork, a fact referenced by the Ginsia in the Japanese version of Radiant Dawn, and the White Dragon Nasir in Path of Radiance. Despite this, most felt peace with the arrangement, except for the Senate of Begnion. This governing body was made up of the Dukes of Begnion's 7 most powerful noble houses, and they had a disdain for the Laguz. For this reason, around the time of the start of the Begnion calendar, the senators started a civil war in Begnion. They claimed that only Bjork could legitimately rule Begnion in the name of a figure known as the Apostle, who held special powers. The first Apostle was namely in actuality a branded descendant of Liran and Altina, who had inherited Liran's powers, including his ability to hear the voice of the goddess. The Laguz underestimated this situation and lost the war against the Bjork's superior weapons and magic. It seems that at this point the Senate instated the Apostle as the ruler of Begnion, and the kingdom became the theocratic Begnion Empire. While it is never explicitly confirmed that these events coincided with the transformation of Begnion's governing system and the start of its calendar, it can at least be reasonably inferred. This based on the fact that the Begnion calendar starts quite a bit after the kingdom was founded, and that the apostles would also go on to become the emperors of the new Begnion Empire. It also coincides with the time frame wherein the practice of Laguz slavery was known to start, according to the Ginsia a bit less than 150 years after the goddess went to sleep. That practice was the logical consequence of the Senate's racism towards the Laguz, with other things also being instituted at this time. The Senate coined the term human for the Bjork, and it had the connotation of being the chosen people, while the Laguz commonly began to be referred to as subhumans, implying their inherent lesser value. The manual of Path of Radiance also mentioned a sort of cosmic hierarchy of races, which may have been instituted by the Senate at this time. The Bjork are made in the image of the goddess, while the Laguz fill the space between the goddess and common beasts. And the Bjork began to keep Laguz as slaves at this time, as mentioned before. The Ginsia protested against this practice at the urging of Liran, but did not undertake further action due to his nation's policy of non-intervention. Only if Goldoa's own existence was threatened directly would it go to war. This as an attempt to make the chance of awakening the goddesses as small as possible. Liran protested against this and went to Begnion to see if he could do anything, but was unsuccessful, eventually returned to Goldoa. The practice of Laguz slavery continued in the next 2 centuries. In that time the Laguz grew disdainful of the Bjork. Some of the slaves used the term human to refer to their masters, but it became derogatory slang for Bjork as time went on. They did use the same pronunciation as their masters, however, as to avoid being discovered. Around the year 200 of the Begnion calendar, some Laguz slaves also managed to escape from their masters and fled to the farthest wilds of Tellius. The beast slaves escaped to the unexplored forests in the west of the continent, and the hawk and raven slaves fled to the south. For the next 80 years, these slaves would war against Begnion in a battle to be recognized. In the end, the empire lost the war, and the various Laguz nations were officially born. Gallia of the beast tribes in the western forests, as well as Phoenicis, the hawk tribe, and Gilvas, the raven tribe from the southern islands. These nations would prove to be safe havens for these Laguz due to their isolated nature. Phoenicis, for example, did not have any ports or docks, so that only the bird Laguz could visit the nation. The people of the bird tribe nations would go on to mostly live off of plundering ships that passed by their waters, earning them the reputation of bloodthirsty pirates. At some point, the Herons split off as well and founded the kingdom of Serenus in their home, the Serenus Forest. With this, a status quo of sort had been reached, with Begnion still dominating most of central Tellius, and various Laguz nations existing on the fringes of the continent. However, as time went on, history would be intentionally distorted by the Ginsia, so to keep the goddesses from awakening, with the fragile state the world had found itself in and all. Ashira was said to be the creator of the world, and Yune was blamed for the Great Flood, only becoming known as the Dark God, trapped inside Leran's medallion, as time went on. The Ginsia also told the other Laguz kings that they shouldn't war, because if enough chaos energy was generated, the Dark God would be unsealed and end the world. Meanwhile, in Begnion, the apostles who could hear the voice of the goddess came to be seen as the bridge between humans and the goddess Ashira. At some point, the Bjork nations, Crimea and Daean, would also split off from Begnion for unclear reasons. This is never given much detail in the games, and only mentioned to have happened recently, as of the year 645. Both nations would go on to maintain strong relations with the Begnion Empire, however, and the empire claimed suzerainty over both nations. The nations also held varied relations with the Laguz. Crimea was more neutral and friendly with them in later years, while Daean had a fierce anti-Laguz ideology. This to such an extent that the children of Daean were taught that Laguz were savage animals who attacked indiscriminately, and it was taboo to use the term Laguz, with the preference instead going to the term subhuman. In the year 624, incumbent Apostle Misaha passed the Laguz Emancipation Act, which outlawed the practice of Laguz slavery. This caught her the ire of the Senate and other nobles, many of whom held slaves. This forced them to keep their slaves a secret, while pretending to the apostle and the public that they had freed all their slaves. It also seems that the passing of the law attracted the attention of Leran, since he sought out the apostle around this time as well. Learning of her ancestry and of Leran's existence, she cast away the shame that had come with being branded, and intended to reveal her true nature to the people of Begnion. This to stop the persecution and hatred that had so long corrupted her nation, but the senators wouldn't have any of it. They conspired to assassinate Misaha, and per the plan of the Senate's Vice Minister Locane, the Heron Laguz of the Serenus Forest were framed for it. An announcement was made by the Senate about this, and that riled up the citizens of Begnion, prompting them to go to the Serenus Forest. They intended to exact vengeance upon the Herons, and started by burning down the forest for 3 long days. After the senators made their announcement, Leran was passing through Begnion under the guise of a Bjork sage, and was there when the massacre started. He hurried to Serenus Forest in an attempt to quell the chaotic energies surrounding the medallion, but touched it instead. Leran was thus consumed by the chaos of the medallion.
Oh, no! Chaos! Madness! So much anger! So much pain!
You who have lost your birthright?
And yet now that I've met you, I understand. There is no shame in my heritage. None at all.
In deference to you, I will place my faith in your kind one last time.
My dear Leran, you are more kind than any other I know.
Afterwards, a remarkable change in Leran's outlook occurred. He decided that the Laguz and Bjork were both deeply flawed, that they only deserved destruction. This change was driven by the direct loss of his family and powers, but also because he lost the final hope he had of undoing the mistakes that had led to him unwittingly causing the massacre in the first place. Because of this change of outlook, Leran decided that there was no need to wait for the 1,000 years to be up, that the Covenant had been squandered long ago. As such, he started to work towards waking the goddesses as soon as possible. But more on that next time.